So hello, everyone. Hello, I am İpek Yosmoğlu, and I am the new incoming president of the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association. And I also teach history at the Northwestern University here. Well, not exactly here, but in this area. And I am very happy today to be discussing with you for a change, something, a positive development coming out of Turkey. And perhaps it's a little early to say that this is a positive development because there have been some false starts in the past, as you know. But we are all cautiously optimistic today. And we wanted to, take an opportunity to discuss this issue with experts in the field and also, listen to you, our membership, your thoughts, and you will be, you will get a chance to ask questions at the end. So my role here is to just welcome you all, and then I'll hand you over to our executive director, to Jim Ryan, who's also the executive director at MERIP since, I believe, last
week.
Yes, yes, congratulations to
Thanks.
Jim. So yeah, I'll just stop it here and hand it over to Jim.
All right. Thank you so much, İpek. And again, in my capacity as the executive director of OTSA, I want to welcome you all to the first, WhatsApp Turkey Now web series that we've been doing of this year, and looking forward to doing more of these throughout the coming year. So today, with us to talk about the local elections, two of my favorite Turkey analysts, Sinem Adar, who is with the Center for Applied Turkish Studies at SWP Berlin, and she is coming to us from Berlin, and Selim Koru, who is a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and also at TEPAV, in Turkey, and he's coming to us from Turkey, from his parents' house, apparently, which is in Ankara, right?
It's in Izmir.
In Izmir, he's coming to us from Izmir.
Yeah.
Okay, great, wonderful. Well, I want to, keep introductions relatively brief because I'm sure we have a lot to talk about, and I want to sort of dive in here. We're going to start off with a very short, first take from each of our guests here, about 5 minutes each, after which I might ask a question or two, and then from there, we really want to proceed to the audience questions as quickly as possible. I'll note we'll take these or field these one of two ways. Please feel free to type in your questions either to the Q&A box or the chat, whenever you feel like, and I'll recite them back to our panelists when the time comes, or to raise your hand, after I give the little signal, and you can ask your question verbally at that point. So to get things started, I guess I'd like to start with Sinem. Please, you had some really great analysis of the dynamics of these local elections. I thought, coming into the elections. I think a lot of people were surprised with the result and how strong opposition mayors performed, not only in the largest cities, but across the country. What does that say to you, and how much of this, did you expect coming into it?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the invitation. Not much, I should say. I guess I kind of thought that Istanbul and Ankara would stay with the CHP, but I honestly didn't expect that the difference would be that high between the CHP's candidates and the AKP candidates, but also in terms of the CHP winning a lot of cities in Inner Aegean and even in Black Sea. That I didn't see coming at all. I guess I have kind of like three takeaways, and I should also say that it is not, and for me at least, it's not an election that is really easy to interpret. Especially just basically kind of like looking at the number at the desk without being in Turkey. because it's kind of like, I feel like one really needs to, you know, smell the air, talk with people, etc., etc. So whatever I'm going to say is going to really based on desk research, so to speak, and some impressions. I mean, I guess the first takeaway is that it's clear that despite the fragmentation of the opposition's alliance shortly after last year's presidential and parliamentary elections, the opposition voters seem to have managed to consolidate under the CHP. And that is because, for instance, the CHP has managed to gain votes from various political parties, including DEM Party, especially in Istanbul, and also in the inner region, for instance. It looks like there's a lot of voterships from E Party, for instance, to CHP. And the primary motivation in my reading behind the opposition voters consolidating under CHP is their opposition against the AKP and the ruling alliance. So they remain united, even though the opposition parties kind of like fall away from one another. The voters remain united in their opposition against the AKP. Yet beyond that, we are really talking about a very diverse set of electorate, in my opinion. And you also see that if you look at the profiles of some of the candidates in different cities. And the concerns of the electorate, I think, range from issues including what Şebnem Gümüşçü calls the self-Islamization and interference into lifestyle, to anti-migration attitudes. And for instance, the candidate in Uşak, the CHP candidate who won Uşak, the first thing he said after he was basically given his official certificate that he would not basically give any business to Afghans and Syrians, right? So there are really, I think, really diverse set of motivations beyond the primary goal of these voters, kind of like opposing the AKP and the ruling alliance. This And here I think one can talk about the İmamoğlu, but also the Yavaş effect. I think for this very diverse set of electorate kind of favoring the CHP. And I think one can also talk about, although it didn't happen like at a large scale, but in a few cities, for instance, in some districts of Ankara, but also in a place like Erzurum, for instance, like 2 districts that CHP won in Erzurum, there you see CHP actually fielding former AKP and MHP members as its candidates. So I think there is also, like, we can talk about actually shift at the level of the elites as well between the parties. And the second takeaway, I guess, is that what happened to the AKP, and there you actually see some of the AKP electorate clearly didn't vote. They chose to stay at home. But there are also, when you go like city by city and district by district in different cities, there is actually voter shifts from the AKP to the CHP, including in the stronghold cities of the AKP, such as Konya and Karaman, where AKP actually lost significant votes. I think in Kayseri, for instance, it's almost like 300,000 votes compared to the 2019 elections. And when you kind of just a very rough calculation, of course, it's very kind of, you cannot say with 100% accuracy without having the ballot box data, but still, I think one can have some impressions by just roughly looking at the numbers. And there, I think there is some shift from both the AKP and also the MHP to the CHP. And I think there, I mean, and this is more, I guess, like it's still at the level of hypothesis. And that's why I think one needs to really go to Turkey and then kind of like start doing ethnographic research to test whether this is true or not. But it seems to me that obviously economy is one of the main drivers behind the AKP's loss. And that, I think, economy, even though last year as well, the economic situation was not good, but AKP was still able to channel resources to its electorate. I think that kind of changed after the transition into the so-called orthodox policy. But at the same time, I think there is also kind of like, it seems to me that there is some change or weakening of the AKP's brokerage role as a party, that kind of like the AKP as the broker between the citizens and the state. And that has to do with, on the one hand, I think the increasing corruption of within the party organization. And on the other hand, also with the presidential system. Because as the parliament completely marginalized, I think the kind of like the link between the citizens, because that was the promise of the AKP, right? Like we are going to basically establish this direct contact with the citizens through the party, etc. It's going to be very fast. It's going to be very efficient. But I think the presidential system might also have kind of like distorted the views of the citizens about the efficiency and the speed of the system, and to what extent it's really effective in terms of this direct link between the citizens and the state. And one final point before I stop is, of course, but one significant factor that lies behind the AKP's loss of votes is the New Welfare Party. You mentioned Gaza at the beginning. And I think the rise of the New Welfare Party is definitely related to all these issues like the corruption of the AKP organization, the economic situation, but also the very position that the AKP took or couldn't take in the Gaza context after October 7th. I will leave that, and then I'm happy to unpack and discuss further. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sinem. Turning to Selim, you know, first of all, you've been on the ground there the last few weeks, I gather. You know, is there anything from maybe even an ethnographic perspective or a first blush from being on the ground that you could, you know, fill in some of these questions that Sinem throws out there about, you know, why we may have seen defections from the governing alliance to the CHP, or are there other kind of unexpected or unexplainable or unexplained phenomena that you noticed in the results of the election last week?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what Sinem said. We're going to spend, I think, a lot of time just digesting the results of this election. It's definitely a lot more to digest than previous elections, I think. What it seems like a lot of people thought that, as Sinem said, the base case scenario where the opposition won was that they hold on to basically what they had in 2019, and the sort of base case scenario for people who thought that the government was going to win was that the opposition was too divided, right? The votes would be scattered all over the place. E-Party would get some, the CHP would get some, Dem wouldn't really play ball with anybody, and it would just be a complete mess for the opposition. And that obviously didn't happen, right? But I think looking at this picture, the AK Party several months ago thought, okay, we can get a lot of votes by just being very, very nationalistic, right? Even when the economy is doing really badly. So it looks like they basically decided to get very comfortable, right? They said, let's stop these handouts because we have to sort of have this very tight economic program anyways at some point, because they've decided for various reasons involving the Gulf and the United States that was the way to go. So they thought, okay, let's see how much we can get away with in terms of the economic structure, right? The economic package. So let's minimize the handouts, and let's just hope that people keep trusting us because of last year's election results, because of how phenomenal they were. And I think they basically thought, okay, if things go badly for us, it's a rerun of 2019, and that's not really all that bad. We can manage that going into 2028. I don't think they thought that this could happen, this massive shift over to the CHP. And probably because voters are much more strategic than people on both sides thought they were. Voters went straight for the parties that had the best chance to win. Most of the time that was the CHP, so they just went for the CHP, right? For the first time, you had significant crossovers from the AK Party or the MHP to the CHP that it hadn't happened before, right? People always talked about it, and that's why you had those small parties, you know, Ali Babacan's party, Deva, and Gelecek, which was Davutoglu's party. These parties were designed to get votes from the AK Party, and they just completely failed, right? They're well below 1% every single election, right? So this election had happened, and you didn't even need those small parties. You could just get votes straight into the CHP. So that's one. And two, of course, Yeniden Refah, the New Welfare Party, they also got a lot of votes, but that crossover was different. That's a crossover to the right, whereas the vote that went to the CHP was a crossover, sort of was a switch to the left, right? And as Sinem said, we're probably going to be analyzing this for a long time, but the rationales for those were probably different, right? The votes that went to the CHP were probably more about the economics, right? Sort of the what's been going on in people's lives on a daily basis, whereas the votes that went to Yeniden Refah were probably more about Israel, about the war in Gaza, right? About sort of the degeneration of, well, the sort of perceived degeneration of conservatives in the country as a whole, right? So I think those are the basics, and then going forward, obviously, I think there'll be serious structural issues to discuss on the opposition, right? How's the opposition going to sort of balance itself between Ankara and Istanbul? What's that going to look like? And I guess we can talk about all that.
Sure. Yeah.
in the
I think
Q&A.
there's a lot to get into there about, where all this leads in advance of 2028. I think we may end up with the longest break between elections in Turkey over the last, I don't know, 15 years. How long has it been since it's been 4 or 5 years between elections of any sort? It's been quite a long time. I want to encourage folks to send in questions via the Q&A and via the chat. I have one more actually that I'm burning to get off and get our panelists' take on, and then I really would love to turn it over to the audience from there. I want to ask Sinem and Selim about, I guess, what's happened since the elections, because to me, I think there's been 3 storylines that have kind of tracked quite most prominently in the last week and a half. The first being the attempt to basically overturn the vote in Van, where a Dem Party mayor was elected. This seemed at the outset to be a repeat or precursor of AKP's strategy in mayoral elections in the Southeast in the past, where democratically elected mayors from the Dem Party were unilaterally replaced by AKP appointees. There was an attempt basically not to certify the victory of a Dem Party candidate in Van. Protests broke out, and the decision appears to have been reversed, again, surprising a lot of people. The second thing has been the utter collapse within the E party, the sort of right-wing nationalist opposition party, and then which has culminated it began with the poor showing on the elections and has culminated with the news I think yesterday that Meral Akşener, that party's founder and more or less the person for whom that party has been a vehicle, is no longer going to be leading that party. What does that mean for the future of the far right within the nationalist or within the opposition coalition, if you want to put it that way? And then the last thing is, there was news just this morning. I got that that Turkey is actually finally making some adjustments to its trade with Israel. Perhaps one would think as a response to the success of the Yeniden Refah Party, the New Welfare Party, which was hammering the AKP on this issue more or less, since October, November of last year. So I just throwing those big three stories out there. Sinem, pick up whatever you'd like, and see it. I know you had some of the best analysis about the Gaza situation with Turkey. I thought coming into the election. So if you want to start with that, or whatever you think, you've got a strong reaction to.
Thank you, Jim. I'll just go one by one because I have something to say about all of them. Just
Great.
very short, quickly. I mean, the one and them, I mean, we didn't talk about them in the first round, but I think actually them is quite interesting, right? Because despite basically kind of all the, I don't know what is the right word to use, the confusion or the mixed signals coming from the party. I mean, when you look at the votes in the metropolitan cities and compare them what happened in the southeast and east. I mean, in the west, them voters, some of them clearly didn't vote, but some also voted for İmamoğlu. And then in the southeast and east, despite almost like 10 years of quite significant suppression of the Kurdish right to political representation, I mean, the turnout rates, that's basically the lowest across the country. So clearly people didn't vote, but it looks like, again, just in a very rough way with the kind of like a naked eye, it might be more the Kurdish voters that vote for the AKP didn't vote, because in a way, like them managed to hold on to the cities, right? And not only hold on to the cities, but also added also extra cities to the ones that it lost. I mean, it gained and then lost in the 2019 elections. What happened in one, I think is, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying that what happened in one would basically completely put an end to the Kayyum practice, the practice of this government appointed trustees. But I think it showed a couple of things. It showed that, or let me put it this way, I think it was triggered mainly by kind of the CHP, them, and one of the other leftist parties. They were able to kind of like stand together. People were on the street protesting, kind of like protecting, again, like their right to choose their own representatives. And I think kind of the friction, so to speak, within the AKP also contributed to the decision to change the decision in one. But in all of this, I think there was also kind of like an intermediating variable, and that's kind of the economy, in my opinion, because in a situation where Ankara is desperately looking at the West for financial flows, I don't think they could actually afford to kind of, especially after people went onto the streets, the opposition parties went to one and then started basically giving speeches, etc. I don't think they could afford actually to go ahead with the decision. So that's kind of, and what it means for them party and also the Kurdish movement, I think that kind of, I would say that probably increased the kind of the possibilities that lie ahead of them in this heavily kind of like suppressed and securitized environment. Collapse within the E party, I mean, that's kind of like postponed collapse. I think that should have probably happened before, after last year's elections. But what I find really interesting is that I try to follow both the Islamist and the nationalist newspapers. Since the elections on Sunday, there is actually quite of an interesting, I mean, it's basically a small circle of people, and I'm not even sure like to what extent kind of we should, how much weight I should attribute to them. But still, the discussion is interesting insofar that kind of people are asking, yeah, what does it mean to be a Turkish nationalist? Are we only going to basically think about being a Turkish nationalist by being opposed to them party? So I think this soul searching that the last year's twin elections kind of pushed, I mean, pushed soul search, so maybe soul searching, it might be a little bit of a too strong of a word, but clearly CHP held a Congress, changed the leader, etc., etc. Now it seems to me that basically the nationalist parties, but also the AKP, kind of find themselves in a similar position. Because if you also look at the debates that are kind of like taking place within some of the pro-government newspapers, there is a really very strong debate putting the party itself into question, but also the presidential system for 2 days now at Yeni Şafak. That's fascinating. Like basically the columnists are opening the presidential system into question. So that to me kind of like, yeah, one of the interesting, I think, outcomes so far of the election results. But when it comes to what you just, the last point about the adjustment to trade with Israel, that's also interesting. I mean, on the one hand, of course, you have the Yeniden Refah effect, clearly, because that was also like, I think it was 2 or 3 days before the election, Erbakan, the head of the party, said that, well, yeah, we are happy to negotiate if you kind of like agree on the following points. And one of them is basically change your Israel policy, close the bases, military bases in Kurecik and Adar. So a couple of items that actually AKP cannot go ahead with. But this adjustment to trade with Israel, definitely, I think it's a reaction to the New Welfare Party effect. But at the same time, I think one should also go 1 day earlier and remember the protests in Istanbul, because there, I think that really the images of female police officers with the headscarf, literally pulling protesters with that scarf, that it seems to me that created some sort of like discussion within the Islamist circles and kind of almost intensified the already existing discontent. So that's kind of, I think, the background why there was a new decision to adjust the policy towards Israel.
Oh, that's fascinating, and thank you, Sinem. Selim, I'm gonna turn to you on these issues too. So just to review really quickly, takes on Dem party turning back the attempted appointee in Van, the collapse of the E party, and the recently announced adjustments to trade between Turkey and Israel.
Yeah. I mean, when it rains, it pours. A lot of things are happening at the same time right now. It's really difficult to keep track. So on them, the Van thing, I would say I don't have a very good sort of feel for Kurdish politics, but my sense has been for a long time that the Kurdish movement wasn't doing very well, right? It's not just that they were being repressed, but their elites weren't really sort of doing as much of the work as they used to. The elites weren't really in touch with sort of what the party needed. The movement wasn't as hungry as it used to be. And I think that was true going into this election. So it's not like they did phenomenally well. They sort of put a lot of energy into this. It kind of sort of happened, it seems to me. But again, not all that familiar with it. What I think is going to be interesting is that Ankara is planning on major operations in northern Iraq mostly, but also they want Syria as well this summer, right? And when they do that, some people are saying that they are going to at the same time take over those Dem municipalities. Right? They'll just appoint trustees the way they did in 2019, and that'll be that. And they'll do that at that time because those operations, they're going to be ground operations as well. It's not just going to be usually when Turkey does something like that in northern Iraq, it's like, oh, we've bombed some PKK positions and that's it. This is going to be a ground operation. They're going to actually take a whole territory, which means losses, right? Which means people are going to die. Turkish soldiers also are going to die, will be killed, right? And in that kind of environment, to say no to sort of protest the appointment of these trusteeships is going to be, they think, politically trickier for the opposition, for the CHP. So they probably want to see what happens with that. So in that sense, the Van issue, I think perhaps that was just a few officials being pretty trigger happy with sort of preventing them from acting. That might not have been essentially sort of planned thing, because they did take a step back pretty quickly. On E-Party, I think Sinem is absolutely right. They've been crumbling for a long time, right? And Akşener has quite a few virtues, right? She knows how to do a few things. She's good at reading politics. She's good at sort of understanding individual leaders. She had some pretty good timing after the coup attempt, especially like the way she came back to politics. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't easy after. So what happened actually with her was after 2015, a lot of people split up from the MHP, and she was one of those people. Like there were like 4 leaders who could have led that movement, and she beat all of them, right? And sort of went off and founded this opposition Ülkücü, Turkic nationalistic sort of party that was supposed to be a centrist party, but she couldn't really swing that. But you know, she held her own. But the thing is, she was never good at running an organization, right? And that's what a political party is. It involves a lot of decision making about sort of very individual, very sort of small details, and keeping everybody happy, distributing rent, and sort of a lot of very complicated stuff that I don't think she was very good at. And over time, that really took a toll on her. So yeah, I think it's probably a good thing that she's resigned. And I think the sort of attempt to build a center-right party in the opposition space is probably not going to work anymore. It's going to be an Ülkücü party, right? It's going to be Turkish nationalists who run that party, and they're going to be more vocal about that identity, which means that it's going to be smaller, right? But what I see happening now is there was always polarization within the opposition, and that's now continuing, but based on the 2 big municipalities. So the nationalists are going to be around Ankara, right? The opposition nationalists. And Mansur Yavaş is probably going to have a lot of influence over İYİ Party, even though he's formerly with the CHP. He's not really a CHP man. He's got a lot of credit with the İYİ Party people. So İYİ Party is going to be his sort of, well, he's probably going to have a lot of influence over that party, right? And then there's going to be the Istanbul crowd, the İmamoğlu crowd, who are much more sort of liberal, kind of pro-Western. They attract all that talent from, you know, sort of Turkish talent from across the world, right? And big business is going to be more friendly to those people, right? So those are going to be the 2 poles of the opposition, it seems. And for the Erdogan people, the Yavaş pole is much more amenable. They'd be okay if those guys win at some point a national election, whereas the İmamoğlu poll is a big is a problem for them. And the İmamoğlu poll is also much closer to the Kurdish movement, right? So I think that's how things are going to take shape on the opposition side. And on the government side, as Sinem said, very interesting cracks showing, because the sort of the Erdogan government and the regime sort of as a whole usually is pretty uniform, and they're very, very hesitant to criticize each other, even though we know that there's different cliques and different groups within that broader structure. But yeah, in the last few days, they have, well, there's the Islamist crowd, for example, very, very distinct. Right? The Islamists who, you know, some of them switched over to new welfare in this election, or some of them didn't, but they're kind of understanding of the people who are, because of the Israel issue, because of sort of overall degeneration, because of also they've they probably don't earn as much as the other crowd, right? They kind of resent how it's supposed to be their government, right? The Erdogan government is supposed to be theirs. They are supposed to be the ones benefiting the most, but that's not quite how it's running, right? There's quite a lot of other people who are making a lot of money and are becoming very influential, right? For example, Mehmet Uçum, who is the sort of chief legal architect of the Erdogan palace. It was a communist growing up, and then went through all these different circles, and he's not really an Islamist, and it's very obvious that he isn't, right? So he's getting attacked, right? Or Özlem Zengin, for example, a woman who is very well spoken and sort of, she's a lawyer. She's wearing a headscarf, but she's from a secular, I think perhaps also an Alevi family, right? But she's kind of this liberal Islamist voice within the government. Last term she was the speaker of the AK Party group. I think she's deputy speaker now. I could be wrong, but she's getting attacked, for example, right? Because people are pointing to her, saying that, it's people like this that drive people away from the sort of our structure, our government, right? And then you have the much more sort of the not so ideological crowd. They're kind of Eurasianist or resentful of American power or yeah, so there is that structure, right? But so, for example, the Sabah newspaper or the Al Bayrak brothers, right? They are a different group, and yeah, they've been kind of silent. I think they're kind of mulling strategy, but yeah, so some cracks showing within the government there.
Oh, so Selim, I don't know if you wanted to address the trade with Israel issue. If not, we can start moving to questions. I have a few Q&A points here.
Okay, sure. Trade with Israel. I mean, my position on that had been for some time that the Erdogan people just don't want to deal with that because they just think of the Israel issue and the regional order issue in a longer term perspective. They do, I think. And they think that in the longer term, Turkey needs to become more powerful. And if it becomes more powerful, it can create an environment for the Palestinians that's much more amenable and sort of be much more dangerous to the Israelis and contain the Israelis much more effectively in the long run, right? But in order to get there, at this point, they have to be much softer on that issue, right? For a variety of reasons. They've decided that this year they're going to be devote their energies to cooperating with the Americans, right? And to building the best relationship they can with the Americans. Appointing Hakan Fidan as foreign minister and having Ibrahim Kalin as chief of the intelligence and sort of really working hard on the Americans. They clearly have something going on in that regard, and they think that the Israel-Palestine issue in the long term perspective is kind of a distraction, even though, I mean, anybody who knows Erdogan and his movement knows that he cares very much for the issue, right? But they've postponed that, and they thought from previous elections that they get to do that their electorate trusts them on those things, right? But there's now so much attrition that the electorate has said, no, we don't trust you on this, right? Because it really doesn't make sense for you to be selling jet fuel or something to Israel as they're doing all this stuff, right? So very briefly, so they're kind of backpedaling on this now, but it's too little too late.
Yeah, that certainly seems like that may be the case. So I have some questions here that came in through the Q&A box, but I also want to encourage folks to just use the raise hand function if they'd like to ask a question verbally. I'm going to read back one or two that have come in, and then you guys can take them up as you think as it moves you. So we have a question from a couple of questions from Jens Bastian. The first is about the polling heading into the elections. You two, like all of us, were kind of surprised by the results. And I think a lot of us were basing our feelings about that at least a little bit on what the polls were saying about what might happen. And obviously there were a lot of recriminations about polling after the last election. How do either of you feel like how reliable really is polling in Turkey ahead of these elections, or how reliable was it? And is there anything we can say about expectations and results in that regard? So I'm going to paraphrase another question here, also from Jens Bastian, about there's a question that some of there were some invalid votes apparently cast, more than 2 million. Obviously election irregularities have been a consistent concern in Turkish elections going back several cycles. In this particular case, there seems to always be, videos and reports of things going a little bit haywire or crazy within polling places. Were you tracking any of that on election day or afterward? And can we say anything about where the status of that issue is? And I will also throw out a question from Abby Schoenfeld about the earthquake response and how I think certainly I felt in advance of the last election that the earthquake would have a huge negative impact on AKP votes. It turns out I was wrong a year ago about that, but perhaps that impact has been delayed to this point. So feel free, either of you. We'll start with Sinem to take up any three of those questions, polling, election irregularities, and the earthquake.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have very smart answers. Polling, yeah, how reliable they are, I don't know. Clearly now we have 2 data points. Or very few of them got it right the last election. And this one, I think there were some who came close. But my guess is that it's because the percentage of the indecisive voters, it's very high. It remains high in the surveys and so on. So when it is so high, I think it's kind of like difficult to guess it right in advance. That would be, yeah, my answer, but I'm not sure of it. The invalid votes, I didn't think about it that much, but I seen comments that interpret the high percentage of invalid votes as a sign of protest. I'm not sure. It could be, it might not be, I don't know. In terms of the irregularities, I think there were some irregularities on the day of the election in the southeast and east, that people were basically carried to the ballot boxes to vote literally in masses. And the earthquake response, yeah, I totally, Jim, I'm with you, because I also thought last year when the earthquake happened, that's it. I mean, because at the end of the day, we are talking about basically a period of literally 10 years, a steady decline since 2013, since the Gezi demonstrations, right? And it is really like steadily declining, the vote share as well, but also in terms of like the breadth of the party, like its space for maneuver. And you see it like in different realms, in different policy fields, etc., etc. And at this point, like after Sunday, I'm kind of like asking myself, maybe the right question to ask is, when the vulnerabilities are actually becoming more and more clear to the eye, why is it because 11 years is long. Why is it taking so long? for a like a political change at the national level. Yeah, so that would be kind of like very short answers to those questions. But I want to say something about them that I realized that I forgot to mention. I mean, the thing is, after last year's election, the strategy of the government was clear, right? Like basically you bring in Hüdapar into your alliance and then use that in the southeast and east to increase the pressure on DEM party, and in a way to kind of also reshape the population, but also the Kurdish movement. I think Sunday's elections have demonstrated that strategy has to a large extent failed, because Hüdapar, okay, Diyarbakır, and I think Batman got some vote, but still not very high vote shares. So that, to me, in the larger context of the AKP plus MHP's strategy on the Southeast East, shows a little bit of a failure when it comes to dealing with the Kurdish movement. And that's why I said that Sunday might have actually kind of increased the possibilities, or kind of a little bit widened the space for maneuver for the Kurdish movement.
Thanks, Sinem. Selim, to the sort of three questions we put out there about polling, the possible invalid vote, protest vote, voting irregularities issue, and a delayed earthquake response.
Yeah, so on polling, I keep hearing all this stuff about the data, and I'm not a big data person. My friends who sort of work in election campaigns and different election campaigns tell me that, sometimes they tell me, well, actually last year, all the polling was against Kılıçdaroğlu. They just massaged the numbers in a way that that made it seem otherwise. I don't know how they would do that, but or other stuff. My understanding from recent polling, I mean, the best polling, it seems, is done privately, so it's not really published. I mean, all these big polling companies like Konzo and Metropole and all those people, they do have to put out numbers ahead of an election just to sort of be able to say that, to compare themselves with other firms. But it seems that from the private numbers, the favorability ratings of all the big CHP candidates were rising steadily for several months before the elections, right? So the people I talked to who were working on campaigns before this said that they were all very confident about İmamoğlu, and nobody had any doubts about Ankara, right? People didn't know that Mansur Yavaş would basically get twice as many votes as his opponent, but people didn't really have any doubts about Ankara. I don't know how the polling did in the smaller cities, especially the Western Anatolia going into the Aegean. I don't know how they did over there, but those are small sampling sizes, and in some of those places they did pretty badly, I think. But I think people don't take those polling numbers very seriously anymore, and for places like Istanbul, they really focus and they have large sampling sizes and they do okay. But for the rest of the country, it's more tricky. On sort of voting irregularities, 2 million, the number cited there, that sounds like a large number. There's some places where there's recounts, but the thing in Turkey is that all the voting is on paper ballots. It's backed up fairly efficiently, and by the end of the day, by the end of the process, both sides of an election generally agree that it was fairly counted, at least, even if the election isn't really fair. In the southeast and in the east, it's a different story, right? Because there's just a lot more space for irregularity in those places because the state is so much heavier of a presence. What they did this time is they bust a lot of people to critical places where they tried to screw the boat. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But they usually bust like soldiers from different parts of the country into Kurdish majority places to vote for the AK Party candidate or the MHP candidate, what have you. And yeah, that has mixed results, but yeah, those things can be done a lot easier over there than in the west of the country. And the last question was the third question was, I'm sorry.
Sorry, now I've had it go. I got it here. Hold on a second. Oh, earthquake response. Sorry.
Earthquake, yeah. I mean, there is a delayed effect of a lot of. I think also what you hear a lot when you talk to people about this election is Erdogan voters will say something like, you know, we love Erdogan, we like him. At this point, he's like a god, anyways. Right? So people don't feel comfortable voting against him, but they do like the idea of sending him a message of being a little naughty at the ballot box, right? And you can do that when it's a regional election. You can't do that when it's a national election. I think if we had a national election right now, we'd have pretty much the same result as last year. I don't think there'd be a major shift, right? But this election was the question this election asked was different, and it got a different response.
Yeah, I think that's right. It makes a lot of sense to me. So I've got one question that came into me privately, so I'll ask it as if I'm asking it, and then I guess I have a follow-up to it as well that piggybacks right off of where you left things there, Selim. So we'll start with you. The question is, what is the likelihood of a snap election between now and 2028 for Erdogan to reconsolidate his mandate to govern? And also, I mean, given that we now have perhaps 4 years to the next election, what does this mean for possible races within races to succeed Erdogan at some point? I know, Selim, you've written about the succession question in the past. So this is a new data point in that question as well. So I'm going to punt it back to you, Selim, and then we'll go to Sinem for these questions about possibility of snap elections and how does the succession question look in light of these latest polls.
So right now, the presidential palace is trying to digest what happened, why it happened, and what their strategy is going to be going forward. They usually take their time with that, and they're usually pretty thorough. Everybody always says they do the best polling. People say that actually, like 10 days before the election, they pretty much knew what was going to happen, but it was too late to change anything. Which sounds right to me. That's probably how it went. Because 10 days before an election, you can't really change things anyways. So now they're evaluating, they're thinking about how to move forward. I'd be surprised if they come up with a decision that involves early elections. Wouldn't be. I mean, there's other ways of garnering up support. And I think they understand that this election posed a different question. It got a different result, but that doesn't mean that people no longer support them. I mean, it is a sort of slap in the face. It is it is a call to tread much more carefully for them and for Erdogan personally as well. But I don't see them going for an early election anytime soon. they're probably going to sort of seize their mandate because, I mean, they'll probably see how it goes with these operations this summer, these military operations. They'll probably think about how to get more support and how to shape the opposition going forward, right? Because Erdogan, by this point, he's so successful that he doesn't need to worry that much about what this election meant. I think that would probably be a mistake for him to do that. And there was a second part to that. I'm sorry.
The succession question.
Yeah, the success. Yeah, it's late over here in my defense. The succession question, that is very difficult, I think, for Erdogan. That's just very, very difficult. There's no obvious candidates. I mean, it seems the Americans are really interested in Hakan Fidan because that's sort of a dream politician for them. I don't think he's even a politician, though. He seems to be. No, he seems to have very good personal skills and all that, but politics is different. Politics requires a different kind of person, different kind of sort of strategist and different kind of everyman. And he's not tested in that field, nor is his current job going to expose him to the kinds of pressure that it takes to make a good sort of a strong politician. Maybe I don't know how they're going to. Yeah, I mean, part of their problem is that if they had a strong candidate, right, they could do something along those lines. They could say, okay, one of the ideas that some people throw out there is that Erdogan could be a sort of president that's not very involved in the day-to-day, and then he could have a lieutenant or a CEO type of person actually running the show. That person would be younger and more involved. I don't know, but it'd be very tricky for them at this point to revisit the constitutional question either. So it's a very tough position for them.
Yeah, that's mainly the reason why I wanted to ask those two questions together, in part because early elections entails not just parliamentary elections, but presidential elections as well. And there are constitutional questions about Erdogan's ability to serve or another term as president. It would put a lot of pressure on the constitutional question, as you put it, and also the succession question along with it. Sinem, you have thoughts on again the possibility of snap elections and a data point in the possible succession, or what a post-Erdogan future, whether that's meaning a post-Erdogan AKP or a Turkish government led by another party might look like.
I don't know. I will tell you what I kind of know as a fact, and I will avoid the kind of looking at the ball and predict the future. But I mean, one thing that is clear to me is that after Sunday, I agree with Selim that I think it has become more difficult now to kind of a referendum for a constitutional change, etc., in the short term at least. That might change, but I think the election result kind of makes it harder. The second thing that is clear, I also think that I don't think, again, in the short term, within the coming 4 years, there will be a rush to do a snap election, because in any case, I mean, they have 4 years to run, and then it is a presidential system. At the end of the day, the executive has quite of a strong grip over power, even if a lot of cities are being lost to the main opposition party, etc., At the end of the day, still, it is the president who is running the country. And because of that, actually, he can also make life difficult for those municipalities. And I think partially they're also playing with it. I mean, even before before Sunday, there is a new law that kind of like now there is a specific unit that functions under the president's office called Kentsel Dönüşüm Başkanlığı, the Urban Development Presidency, that basically is going to be solely responsible from the urban development projects, right? So in a way, that's that's a way to, again, undermining the local power, etc., etc. So I think there are some instruments that the president can use to further undermine the local governance. Yet, as different from the 2019 elections, given the fact that CHP did not only win the cities, but also they managed to get the city councils in a lot of cities. So I think that kind of strengthens the hand of the CHP in running the local governance. But still, I mean, in the presidential system, the president can do a lot of things. And I think in the coming 1 year at least, if not more, the priority is fixing the economy. I think that's kind of like where the focus is and where the focus will be. And a little bit, especially the Sabah journalists, I mean, they were kind of, I guess that's also the image they want to paint, that her işte bir hayır vardır. I mean, there is a good in everything. So we should read it like that. And maybe it's actually good. Let them run the municipalities and let the population see that they cannot actually run the municipalities. So I think that might also be kind of like something that they might be betting on. But at the same time, I think now the AKP has really an AKP problem. Like, because the thing is, now you lost Deva Gelecek, like kind of the so-called liberals within the party. Now with the new welfare party, you also lost your core Islamist kind of constituency, right? Then what is left of the AKP? What is AKP? And I guess that's going to be the question that's really keeping the party busy. And I'm not sure like how much that would keep the presidential office busy, because I think there is really like strong differences in opinion there. And I guess that's all to say that the space for maneuver, even though, again, the presidential system grants significant powers to the executive, the space for maneuver will be even narrower. And I think that will also be, that narrowness will be accentuated by the fact that, because again, clientelism is the bread and butter of the national electoral machine of the AKP. Now, losing more cities, you lose the resources for that clientelistic practice. Therefore, that's, I think, another factor that would limit the space for maneuver. Yeah, so that's, I mean, none of this is an answer to your questions, but I do not think that there will be a rush to call a snap election. But I think because of the fact that the loss is such a big loss, it is now even more difficult to stabilize an already unstable presidential system. And that is, to me, like, that leaves a lot of room for surprises.
Yeah, I certainly agree there that a lot could happen. So we've kind of crept over an hour of our program here, and I don't see tons of new questions here. I think we might be a good idea to close it off there, Ipek, unless you know, we want to, if you've got a burning question, or if you think there's something we left unaddressed.
Okay.
But I know it is late in
It's
Izmir.
not, I don't have a burning question, but I wanted to end on remember at the beginning I said there's reason to be cautiously optimistic, and I am, you know, the first to, you know, feel that, okay, let's not start congratulating and being happy about the outcome of these elections and be more circumspect and everything. But the tenor of the discussion today was, you know, it went even further in that direction. And what I kept hearing was that it was more what AKP didn't do or Erdogan didn't do than what CHP did. So it was as if like there wasn't a lot of agency on the part of CHP for this outcome, which I think may be a little unfair to it, especially to some of the leadership. And the other thing is, for me, what I really found really striking and gave me hope after the elections was that, and I'm thinking about this in a more global context, that the ruling, even though this is a very, you know, as you know, strange, very strong executive, you know, presidential system, it was really interesting how, as the results were coming in, Erdogan, you know, capitulated pretty fast. And, you know, there wasn't even this like attempt to create confusion or question the results. And especially for someone who's been living in the US for most of, well, you know how the story went here and also in other places. I found this to be, I don't know, a glimmer of hope that there are certain institutions in Turkey that have not yet been eroded as much as we think they are. And maybe it is something to think about and also, question how this came to be when we're thinking about what will happen in the next elections. And I don't think I agree that Erdogan would, if the same elections happened today, I don't think he would win as handily as he did last time. But that's my, naçizane, my, humble opinion, reading the situation. And I may be a little too, I guess I'm really hungry for good news and trying to be optimistic.
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, we went this whole discussion without mentioning, really the one major thing that CHP did do, which is change leadership, and quite significantly. And I think it, as Selim has mentioned, there's a lot to study in this election. It would be interesting to see how much of the shift towards the CHP is simply a result of changing personalities at the top of the party, or whether there were, tactics and strategies and policies put in place going down the chain that produced this result. I think that's something that, there's probably a lot of information out there to glean on that. Any parting thoughts here, Sinem or Selim?
Just one note to that. Özgür Özel, I don't know when, like in the election rally in Kilis, and Kilis is an interesting city, right? CHP won it. That's basically the city with the highest density of Syrian refugees, 31.9 or something like that. But he says something there, which is fascinating to me. He says to the crowds, and he first basically in a very inclusive tone embraces all of them, no matter who they are, etc., etc. Then he says, don't worry, if you choose our candidate, the mayor of Ankara, Mansur Yavaş, will have his hand on the right shoulder of our candidate. And don't think that the left shoulder of the candidate will be left empty. Our mayor in Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, will have his hand on the left hand of our candidate. I'll just leave there because I think it's a fascinating quote. Also, because at the end of the day, I think I need to think about this more. But to me, what the election shows is that actually the electorate positioned CHP at the center, not right, not left, at the center. And that is, I think, a major blow to the AKP's aspiration to consolidate a nationalist Islamist with all sorts of far-right tones coalition. And that's definitely something very important and needs to be cherished, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. Selim, parting thought here?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is, as Peko just said, well, a lot of us have trained our eye on Ankara and on Erdogan and the sort of Islamist movement and the sort of regime structure for a long time, right? So it's easier for us to talk about that. And so I was thinking a lot about this during the last elections. I thought, well, a lot of change has happened in the opposition space, and perhaps we haven't been able to look at that as hard as I'd like. I think what's happening is that there are stirrings in the opposition space and very interesting things happening. And obviously the big thing, as you said, is the CHP taking down its leader by force, really, in that party congress against Kılıçdaroğlu, and installing somebody new. And that new person is actually fairly young, right? And he's actually sort of trying to do some fairly novel things without changing things too much. And I thought his victory speech was absolutely pitch perfect. It couldn't have been better. And I guess some of the choices he made were pretty good. But I think going forward, it's going to be a story of these two major cities. and how they sort of shape things. And Özgür Özel's is probably going to be in the middle, trying to steer the whole process along. But yeah, very interesting. But I think in the Erdogan space, things are people are unhappy, and they're willing to vote. I mean, that is my take. They're willing to vote for the opposition in this one, but overall, they still like Erdogan's big project of sort of being a big power and reversing a lot of the values of the country and all that stuff. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of room for hope, coming out of this election. Yeah.
Not a bad place to end it. İpek, as the host of the meeting, I'll leave you with the final goodbye here, or whatever you want to say. Go ahead.
Okay, first I had to manage to unmute myself, but thank you so much. This was a wonderful discussion, and also, as Jim pointed out, we are going to have stay tuned. We're going to have other events and discussions, not just about Turkey today politics, but also the other topics that we really like to discuss about Ottoman history. And so please make sure that you check in periodically to see what's on offer. And I would like to thank again all of you for being here, and our panelists and Jim for making this event happen. Thank you. And let's stay positive.
Thank you, İpek. Thank you, Selim. Thank you, Sinem.
Thanks a
This was
lot.
great.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you again soon.
Bye.